Royal history is a funny thing, because really we get the stories and then we get the backgrounds of the historians, but unless really you were there, it's very hard to know exactly what was true and what wasn't true. And this was the problem for none other than one of our greatest monarchs, Queen Victoria. We're here today in Kensington, which is literally her former home, the Kensington Palace, as it were. And this is, of course, where she spent her formative years. And as I've told you before, the thing about Queen Victoria was she was very ahead of her time. But of course, the Victorians were. That was the beauty of that particular era. They really designed so many things that we use today, everything from, say, the London Underground to the waterways, the reservoirs, great inventors, the opportunistic people were nourished and cherished, and more importantly, had a lot of success. You simply don't get that today, and particularly with a backing of, say, a royal warrant. But this particular man did, and then certain things sort of backfired. And I'll leave it to you to decide what you believe. As ever, let me explain. Morning, good to see you today. Thank you so much as ever for taking the time out to join me. And I really appreciate your company. Isn't this beautiful? Don't you I just love these sort of lush areas, don't you? I don't look at, when you look at the hedges, chums, and you think, how did they get them like that? When you've had to go hacking it with your shears, have you tried that? Oh no, on a hot day as well. And you think, why am I doing this? This is the thing, isn't it? And then you go out, you look at somebody else and think, maybe I could try a little bit harder. That's the thing. Now, when I look at these royal stories that I love to share with you, whether it's be from meeting people or indeed just doing the research, it's always marvelous because, I was talking to a great theatrical legend the other day, and they were talking about how, when they get the part, it always starts with the wig. And I thought, this is fascinating, because obviously you realise that theatrical people wear wigs, of course they do, but you never really think of it as defining the part. And they told me a wonderful story about a very, very famous wig maker in theatrical circles over 100 plus years ago now, who was lucky enough to get a royal warrant. That's right, Willie Clarkson. Now, Willie Clarkson was a flamboyant sort of person who literally found favour with Queen Victoria. And she liked him so much because, you see, he provided the wigs to a lot of the balls and servants and stuff like that, but also the in-house plays and musicalettes that they would have at Kensington Palace here, or indeed Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, Osborne House. Now, he became incredibly famous very quickly, very fast, and his business took off. He supplied all the great artists of the day and more, and you can understand it, because as I said, as this actor said to me, it starts with the wig. He then moved into doing things like masks as well, so that you could obviously change your face if you were doing something like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But here's where this gets really interesting, because according to the story, you see, and this is how this became the story. Now, you have to decide whether this is true or not. Apparently one day somebody came into his emporium in Wardour Street, and he was chatting away, and he said, oh, what's that for? And he said, oh, this is for Queen Victoria. And they said, oh, right, didn't really say too much about it. Very quickly, all thanks to the gossip mill of the day, it then began to circulate that, in fact, Queen Victoria was now wearing wigs. Now, there's nothing wrong in that. Queen Elizabeth I wore wigs. This had gone on throughout all the Georgian era with men and King George and all that sort of stuff. So it was nothing really new. But apparently they found this quite shocking, because Queen Victoria was always cited as never actually being that vain. But the story goes that actually the throwaway remark was, what he should have said, and this is again where you have to decide yourself, is that actually it's for a production for Queen Victoria that he was putting on and supplying all of the wigs, not for the monarch himself. When this apparently got back to Queen Victoria sometime later, apparently shall we say, the meeting was slightly frosty to start with, because she said apparently to him, do you think it's time I wore one of your talents, your wigs? And he said, oh no, Mom, And then she said, well, that's not what I've heard. And consequently, this went back and forth to the point where she was kind of angry, and perhaps that royal warrant could have gone missing forever. But he managed to talk his way out of it. Now, what's fascinating here is he lived right through to the 1930s and still was as famous as he was back then, because he was so good at that job. But it just goes to show, doesn't it, that actually, truth be told, maybe he secretly did provide a wig for Queen Victoria, because many people hadn't seen it for years. She was very concerned about the weight that she put on, and whether that, the subjects, us, the people, might consider that they got an old monarch. Either way, he managed to survive. But as I said at the start of this video, it's like all Royal Insider news. As time moves on, the story moves on, and you have to make a decision yourself as to whether it was real or not real. A bit like the wig. Neil Shawn, Kensington, London.